So this is the third and hopefully last piece of this set of videos that I put together, and it just got me started when I started doing this word study, looking into the number of times Jehovah was used, God was used, memorial figures in attendance, and looking back at my family history, what I knew from what they talked about, their experience with the Watchtower Society, and coming into the truth. I decided to kind of look back a little bit into Russell's life, a little bit, background, find something that was independent of really basically the propaganda that I grew up with. I mean, he was the Laodicean messenger. I mean, this whole movement built up around him as a cult. It was a personality cult. And I found some interesting things about this man, because here we had a whole movement that was built up around him, and we had a period of time right after his death that was really a period that was designed by the leadership that had taken over to deliberately sever those who were loyal to Russell versus those who would support and remain loyal to the society. And they did that by means of doctrinal change, maintaining the idea of new light and following this new light, and that meant in many cases having to accept teachings on the Bible that were not Russell's. And there were many, in fact most, who were so enamored, so in awe and admiration, basically adoration of Russell, that they refused to accept any change that was promoted by the new president, Rutherford. And so I think Rutherford knew that this was going to be the case, and that in order to prevent the society from collapsing altogether, just fracturing, and to the point where the society wasn't salvageable any longer, he did it very carefully, and there was a definite intent. I think they knew what Russell wanted with the society, and Bible students are unable to come to grips with the idea or accept the idea that Russell would have ever accepted any of the changes that Rutherford brought about in the movement. He usurped the movement. He was an agent of the devil to incorporate error into the bright light of truth that Russell had given to the Bible students. And the whole idea that Russell was this ideal, exemplary individual that was specially used by God, and that Rutherford, they demonized him and picked out all his flaws and emphasized it. Now, I'm not defending him, but he certainly was he was a brusque, abrupt individual. Even Macmillan admits that Rutherford had an abrasive personality that really ran counter to most people, and if you didn't accept what Rutherford said, then you found yourself on the outs. Rutherford wasn't about to take no for an answer. He was, you do it my way or the highway. And that kind of an attitude and projecting himself that way from a personality point of view didn't work didn't work towards keeping those that were used to Russell, let's say, supportive of the changes that he incorporated in the movement. But I don't think that they would have accepted that anyway. The way Macmillan explained it in his book was that the Bible students were pretty well ready to believe that the work was done once Russell was off the stage. Once Russell passed away, and if he passed away, then the seventh messenger was gone, and the work of the seventh messenger, which was the call, the high calling, the 144,000, would have been over. And it seemed to make sense to most of them at the time. But that wasn't necessarily what Russell wanted. Many Bible students criticized Rutherford for not holding on to the terms and conditions of the last will and testament that drafted up by Russell. We got an air show. Sorry about that. We got an airport just a mile away, and we got an air show going. This is the last day of the air show, so there may be some noise every so often. But there were the movement really didn't take to Rutherford, and I think Rutherford used that. I think he planned that because he realized that he wasn't going to get the kind of support that he needed to grow the Watchtower when so many were completely and totally devoted to Russell and his message. So he had to purge these individuals. And I think Rutherford knew that Russell was, and he was aware that Russell expected the work of the Watchtower to go on. Macmillan explains this, that while he had this discussion, he was of the mind that once Russell was out of the way, the work was done. And Russell explained to him that no, that it wasn't done, that there was a worldwide work that had to be completed. And it took a little convincing, apparently, to make Macmillan see that this was so, and for Macmillan to accept Russell's wishes on this. Now, these are things that Russell wouldn't necessarily make known to the movement at large, only to those closest to him that were able to affect change. And that seems to be the directors, most of the directors, and those that were closely in association with them. And I think those were Van Amberg, who worked with Russell since 1903. He was the treasurer of the society for quite some time. Rutherford was the general counsel for Watchtower since 1907. Macmillan was the office manager and manager of the Bethel family, the home provisions, and so on. And these three individuals were the ones that really kept things going for Russell. And I suspect that they understood better than most others that what Russell wanted for the society. And I think it's consistent with his personality, and it got me curious about who this guy Russell is. And there's a lot that you can find on the internet about Russell, but how much of it can you believe and how much of it is hype? You know that if you go to anything written by Bible students, it's going to be over the top for Russell, and that's basically the case. And then on the part of Watchtower, they don't really give a whole lot of information about who the man was, except that he was a seeker of truth and that he was the founder of the movement, founder of the society. And so I have a subscription to Ancestry, which I bought for myself and looking into my own genealogy, and I decided to use it in looking at what information I can gain on Russell, his family. I was aware of the fact that he had been married, but Bible students don't talk much about these things, about the personal life of Russell. He lived his life beyond reproach as far as any were concerned. If you criticize him for anything, any of his failings, you really were looked at with a great deal of scorn and disfavor by Bible students. You just didn't do it. You didn't criticize him. He was the wise and faithful servant. So you didn't criticize him. You didn't look into his life. And frankly, for most of my life growing up, there wasn't any way really to do the research that there is today. The internet has really turned everything upside down because information is available almost to a fault, because a lot of information that you find on the internet is it's hard to fact check, and so when I did my looking into Russell, I did as much. I tried to do it with as much, let's say, credible information as possible. Newspapers, census reports, and other things, last will and testaments, for example. And there's an awful lot that is written about him, but you don't know without any citation for information source. It's a little difficult to accept as having any credibility. And I'm aware and have read a lot about Russell. It's hard to verify because there's so much that is written with venom about him, that he was a pedophile, that he was a secret Mason, member of the Masons, and as if that, for some reason, was by itself some kind of a criminal act. I don't know much about the Masons, but I doubt very seriously that they're secretly controlling the world. But regardless of that, that kind of stuff. I'm not. If there's no way to verify any of it, I'm not going to try and promote it. Maybe I'll relay something. I'm going to try and be as factual about things as I can be, with information that is supportable. And so one of the things I did was I looked on Ancestry to see what information I could get there, and I found something interesting about Russell in the federal census that was taken in 1880. And I took some screenshots of this. I don't think I am going to use screen capture for Ancestry on this. I'm just going to do some screenshots. But this is public information. You can get the federal census is available, and so it's not anything that is in violation of any kind of let's say copyright or anything like that. So let's take a look at what I found. Now, Charles Taze Russell was born in 1852. I believe it was February of 1852. I don't have the exact date memorized. And there are several census records of him and his father and his family. He had some siblings, only one of whom I believe survived into adulthood, and that was Margaret Land, and she was his sister from their first mother. Now, both Russell's parents were born in Ireland. His father was Joseph Little Russell, Lytle, kind of a strange way to spell it, but he was born in 1813. Russell's mother, Eliza, I believe it was, died when Russell was 8 or 9 years old in around 1860 when she passed, and Russell grew up with a single parent. Now, his father didn't remarry while they were children, and Russell, his education stopped at the 7th grade. This you can find from statements he made on his own in the Watchtower. He talks about his life. There are a couple of short accounts of his life. Also, there was a biography written in 1923 called The Laodicean Messenger that talks about Russell's youth. So if you want information about Russell and in his earliest years, you can refer to those bios. The reason I'm starting with 1880, we're going to have to wait for this plane to pass. They got some World War II aircraft. That's a Lightning. That's a P-38 Lightning. Pretty cool. My dad actually flew in one of those in the Navy back in the Second World War. So the reason I'm starting with 1880 is because that's about the time when Russell's ministry began. He had become interested in religion, had a small study group in the 1870s with individuals like George Storrs, Joseph Russell, and Margaret were among the early Bible students that studied with Russell in his little study group. And there were other Adventists. Stetson was another who had a history with the William Miller Adventist group. And Russell borrowed a lot of the doctrines, the ideas from individuals that were associated with the Adventists or had some connection with the great Second Awakening period that occurred in the early 19th century, and people like Henry Grew. And he adopted ideas such as there was no hell, that the Holy Spirit was the power of God, dispensations, that the earth and God's plan was divided up dispensationally, and also chronology, Bible chronology, that would lead to the second advent of Jesus, as what they believed would be predicted in the scriptures. And a lot of that chronology came from Nelson Barber, who initially had the date 1873. They moved it to 1874. Russell settled finally on the date 1874, the year that the Lord returned. And when he met Nelson Barber, Barber also had an associate, John Patton, who worked with him in publishing a news or a letter, news, not a newsletter, but a religious circular called the Herald of the Morning, I believe. And Russell got involved with them in around 1876, and the three of them pretty much worked together closely as editors and writers for this paper, the Herald, that was initially put out by Barber. Well, Barber and Russell collaborated on a book that compiled a lot of these ideas that Russell had picked up from his Adventist associations, and they titled it The Three Worlds. And Russell paid for the publishing of it, and this book began to get circulated in the circles of the subscribers to this Herald paper. Well, it wasn't very long before Russell had a fallout with Barber, and it was over this the doctrine of the ransom, substitutionary aspect of Jesus' sacrifice, a perfect man in sacrifice for Adam's transgression, which was the fall of a perfect man. So it required the sacrifice of a perfect man to justify and offset the sin that was committed by a perfect man. Barber didn't buy into this idea of a substitute for ransoming Adam from his sin, And they began having a debate in the pages of the Herald, where Barber would renounce Russell's beliefs, and Russell renounced Barber, and they had quite a bitter falling out, to the point where Russell withdrew his funding. Now, the Herald was not was on the verge of bankruptcy when Russell met Barber. And since Russell had been a fairly successful businessman, he had a small fortune for his period of the 19th century. I think he had amassed up to about $300,000 in personal assets, and today that would be worth probably in the area of $14 or $15 million. I forget exactly what the exchange would be, what the inflation amount would be, but it was fairly substantial. I mean, he was well-to-do. He was independently wealthy, and so in 1879, Russell broke with Barber and published his own paper called Zion's Watchtower. And the first issue of that was sometime around July of 1879. And that was the same year that he married, and he married a gal, Ackley, Mariah. It was spelled Maria, just like Maria, Maria. I understand it was pronounced Mariah, and she was a native of Allegheny, as was Allegheny, Pennsylvania, as was Russell. And I don't know exactly how they met, but they were married. They apparently had a very short association or period of association beforehand. I think they knew each other about 4 months from what Russell indicated, and then before they married. And the 1880 census, which was conducted in June of 1880, June 14th of 1880 is the date on the census. And we see here Russell named as head of the household. His wife, Maria, is listed as living in this household under the same address. I think this was 80 Cedar Avenue. His father, Joseph, was 67 at the time, and he lived at this address. And I think he lists himself as being 60, but he was actually 67. He was 84 when he died. And in 1880, they were married. He was married to Emma 17 years, because he died in December of 1897 at the age of 84. So he would have had to have been, 84, somewhere around 67 years old in 1880. Now, there is a record of Russell's marriage. There's a small newspaper clipping of Russell's marriage to Mariah, which confirms that they. I couldn't find a marriage license, but there was an article that was published indicating that they were married. From what I read, John Patton married them, and the one other name listed in this in the household, with Charles listed as the head of the family, was Emma Ackley, and she went by her maiden name. Now, Emma married Joseph. She was the younger sister of Maria, and the four of them lived under the same roof in 1880 at the same address. Emma was 26 at the time, and Russell was 28, and Maria was about a year older than Russell. And it lists them here at this point that Russell was a merchant, and Joseph was listed as a merchant. He also listed himself, checked off as widower, and Emma as single. So we know that as of June 14th, 1880, their relationship, Joseph's and Emma's, was one of they were just they weren't married. Joseph was a widower, and Emma was living in the household as a single individual. She did not identify as married. Now, I did a search, and I tried an exhaustive search for marriage records for indicating Joseph and Emma's wedding, and I couldn't find any. Now, they had a daughter, Mabel Russell. She later married in 1903 to a guy by the name of Packard, so her surname became Packard. But Mabel was Charles' half-sister, and she was Emma's daughter. And she was born, there are birth records that indicate that she was born on September 16th, 1881. So Joseph Russell and Emma would have had to have been married sometime between June 14th and December 16th in order to make Emma that's an old single-engine airplane. In order to make Emma, let's say, legitimate, according to the standard of, accepted norms of the day, you got to remember this was the Victorian era, and the appearance of morals was very. Was taken very seriously. You could be very stigmatized in society if you were born out of wedlock. And I can't find any record of Joseph and Emma having ever been married. Now, which is interesting because there is a will, and there was a probate court listing, and there was a handwritten will where Joseph identifies them as his beloved wife. Certainly by 17 years they would have been considered common law marriage, but at the time Mabel was born, it's not clear whether or not Joseph Russell and Emma were indeed legally married. Now, I searched very hard through it took a long period of time searching through family trees and other things that might have had records that would have been produced that showed that they indeed, like a marriage license or a newspaper clipping that would have confirmed Joseph's and Emma's wedding and marriage, but I couldn't find anything. And it was interesting because in most of the family trees, and there were a number of them, that identified Joseph Russell and Emma, and they have them married in 1879. Now, that could not have been. That isn't correct. They were listed here as not being married in the 1880 census. So that's clear that any information that suggests that Emma and Joseph were married in 1879 is incorrect. Now, there was one family tree that I came across that indicated that they were married, that Joseph and Emma were married, but there was a side note that said may not have been legally married. And I found that interesting because apparently this individual, as hard as he tried, could not find information either that verified that could confirm that they were indeed legally married. So it's quite possible that Mabel was really born out of wedlock, out of a legal wedlock. And as Russell became increasingly popular, and his notoriety, let's call it that, his name was becoming more publicly known as a minister, well-known minister, a celebrity minister. Russell would have to try to keep things like that out of the public eye. So as opposed to having them marry, which would have then made it public and there would be public record, that would have suggested that Mabel was born out of wedlock, or at least conceived out of wedlock. It seems to me that Charles Russell would have rather have had it just assumed that the two were married and pass them off as married to avoid any criticism or having any documentation that could indicate that they weren't married when Mabel was conceived. So I believe in a sense that Joseph and Mabel were a bit of Mabel and Emma were a bit of a liability to Russell. But they apparently went along okay. Nobody seemed to question anything about this relationship that existed between the four. I'm certain that when Mabel was born, Charles and Emma found their own residence. Now, I know that at some point the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, which was incorporated in 1884, purchased what they called the Bible House on Arch Street in Allegheny, which at the time was a separate city from Pittsburgh. And there were rooms. They put up the volunteer help at the Watchtower. They called it the Bible House, or I forget if the home was called Bethel. I think Bethel was what they called the home of the residents of the Brooklyn when they moved to Brooklyn. But I know that they lived at residences that they put up in Allegheny, and it wasn't. It was separate from this home here. So at some point, Mariah and Russell moved out into a separate residence of their own. Now, Russell, he was well-to-do, and he owned several properties of his own in Allegheny, and most everything was in his name up until around 1903, and that's about the time when Russell donated all of his assets, all of his properties to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and there was a good reason for it, because by 1897, the relationship between Mariah and Charles Russell had become soured. It was they had a very antagonistic relationship, one towards the other. And there were allegations of cruelty that were made on the part of Mariah against Charles, and there were some allegations, conversely, attacks that were made on Mariah's character. And for one thing, Emma, apparently, her sister, younger sister, had become a suffragette. She became an advocate for women's rights, and Mariah had been convinced that women weren't properly treated and that they should have equal rights with regard to voting in particular, having a say in governmental affairs. Now, this is an article that I found in the Watchtower written by Russell that indicates his position with regard to the suffragette movement and the place of a woman, and he very strongly, very clearly indicates that the arrangement that was established in the ecclesias, where men were the teachers, elders in the class, was an arrangement that was established by God, and that if women really had a proper understanding of their role and their place in the Lord's scheme of things, that they would be satisfied with their role as housekeepers, and wouldn't be carried away by the suffragette movement. He states in this article that, let's see if I can find that. We believe that if women would get a proper focus on this matter, the woman's role, as it's stated, it should be in the Bible, or at least what he says it should be from the Bible. We believe that if a woman would get the proper focus on this matter, there would be an end to women's suffrage. They would feel that they had a duty at home, and there are exceptions to every rule. But Christian parents have said to us, if we had known the truth sooner, I would have known how to be a better father, a better mother, but I was not taught anything as to the responsibilities upon me as a parent and what was meant by the proper training of a child. And so he he was adamant. This was an article from the one of the editions of the 1911 Watchtower. This is a reprint 4750 on page 27. And if you want to get a hold of this statement, but he made other statements regarding women's suffrage. He, at one point in a trial, his divorce trial, indicated that her mind was poisoned with women's suffrage, the idea of women's suffrage. Now, this little clip here is a newspaper notice from the Pittsburgh Gazette in March 14th, 1879, that announces the wedding and the marriage of Charles Taze Russell and Miss Maria Ackley of Allegheny. And it says they were married at the residence of the bride's parents on Thursday evening. Not much of a notice, but at least it's evidence that indicates that they had a service, that they announced their wedding. I couldn't find the marriage license. It was difficult for me to identify it, but at least we have this clipping that indicates that they were legally married, or at least there was an announcement of their legal marriage. Now, Russell had this to say about special advice on marriage. Now we have this little clip that indicates a legitimate marriage between Russell and Maria, but we can't find anything on Joseph, Little, and Emma. And it's interesting to see that one of the very last things that Russell wrote in 1916, just before his death, there was a little article, or a little blurb, pastoral guidance or pastoral counseling on marriage. And it reads, it's very interesting. If I can bring it up, it talks about his crazy idea of what happens to humans in the 1,000-year kingdom, the times of restitution. He indicates that he believes that people will lose their sex distinction. He says the Bible clearly teaches that when the plan of God shall be completed by bringing the restitution to the world, this restitution will bring humanity to that condition in which Adam was previous to the separation of the woman from him. And so we have the words of Jesus to that effect: those deemed worthy to obtain that age and that resurrection from the dead neither marry nor given in marriage, because they are like the angels. In other words, in the times of restitutions, males and females will lose all their distinctive features and once become again as Adam was in the beginning, each complete in himself. And the earth shall be filled with people. God did not design to overfill the earth, but to fill it. And then he continues and he says, while the union of a man and woman is a matter of love between themselves, the law steps in and says that there must be suitable regulations and some formal way of authorizing their union before others as witnesses, so as to avoid trouble in the future. So he views this situation as being potentially disruptive to an individual's reputation, to their life, by not having documentation that proves that the two are formally or legally married. Consequently, there are certain specifications regarding licenses, etc., all of which we believe quite proper. Why would he have that on his mind? Why is that something he felt needed? He was compelled to have to instruct people. I think that he had Emma and Joseph in mind. And, this situation, you had this old widower. He was in his 60s with this young gal living under their roof, and why isn't it that you can find a marriage record for the two? I suspect that there was a little extramarital hanky-panky going on. I can't prove it 100%, but the fact that there's no record that can be obtained that indicated that that Joseph Russell and Emma were legally married can be found anywhere. And there's this indication in one of the family trees that their union may not have been a legal marriage. But after a while, it did, under the law, it is recognized as a common law marriage. And she had rights to what they call dower rights, or rights of a wife to property after they pass away. And we'll take a look at some of that in a little bit, because I think it's interesting. And it begs a couple of questions when you look at this matter. But I understand that Russell may have actually interfered with his father's will. When you stop and you think about it, you have the 67-year-old man who marries a 26-year-old girl. In those days, you didn't expect necessarily to live to a very old age. If he had properties, if he had money, you would think that he'd be obligated to give it all to her, to make sure that she and the daughter are sufficiently supported when he passes. And that didn't happen. And I understand that there may have been some suggestion on the part of Charles to amend Joseph's last will and testament to include Margaret Land, Charles' full sister, and to donate money to the society. This is a copy of Joseph Russell's last will and testament, and this was from probate records in Florida, because there were some Florida properties. And in this, this is, the last will, boy, that's hard to control. Last will and testament of Joseph Russell of Allegheny, Pennsylvania. And he estimates his total worth to be about $30,000, his whole estate, and he lists them out. Now, I find this interesting because he was the one that started this haberdashery business that Charles inherited. It was Russell and Son, and listed as that for their entire time. Charles ended up with about $300,000 from the sale of that business, and Joseph had that much less. It's really a bit surprising to me that his estate was only $30,000 in total. And it's interesting that he divides this up. Okay, I wish I had better control of this. He divides up these properties. Okay, so he owns several homes in Allegheny, and he estimates the values of these homes. The home that he gave to Emma was the most expensive home, but it was it had a mortgage on it of $2,500. So she had to take care of that mortgage. So there was a debt associated with that. So even though it was the most expensive property that he owned, you have to subtract the $2,500 in debt. Now, all of this sounds relatively minor in amounts by today's standard. You got to remember that in 1896, you got to multiply these factors, these amounts by a factor of about 35, 30 to 35, to bring them up to the purchasing power equal for 2021. I think his entire estate was of $30,000 was just shy of $1 million. So that gives you some rough idea of the values that of these properties. So $30,000 in 1896 was quite a sum of money, but he wasn't one of these magnates. He wasn't a Carnegie or anything of that nature. But he did give her the house. Emma did end up with, I estimated, when I calculated the total minus the mortgage, she inherited the greater bulk of that $30,000. I totaled it to about $13,000. You can do that for yourself. You can. It's easy to access this information online if you have an Ancestry account. So Emma was the first to be identified in the will. She inherited, like I said, about $13,300 was the total that I came up with. Now, Mabel was their daughter, and at the time of his death, she was still a teenager. She was about 16 years old. He died in December, I think it was December 16th, 1897. And that was just after Maria leaving Charles. So that all happened about the same time. Joseph died at about the same time that Maria left Charles. Marital problems. So Mabel, their daughter, Charles Russell's half-sister and niece at the same time. It was very strange because the father and son married two sisters. And it was kind of an odd situation. But Russell remained married. Joseph Russell remained married to Emma to the end of his life. They were together about 17 years. So Mabel inherited some property, but this property it was held in trust by her mother until she was 21. And it involved a house and some stock. Russell owned some stock, about 180 shares in the Pittsburgh Kaolin Company, and he estimated that the shares, each share was worth about $50 each, and that the total sum of his stock ownership was $9,000 altogether. And so Mabel got 40 shares. Emma got 100 shares and 2 homes. Like I said, about a total of $13,000. And then Margaret Land, the half-sister to Mabel, Emma's sister-in-law, Charles' full sister, she was listed in the last will and testament, and she inherited Florida properties in Tarpon Springs. There was a home and 25 acres of land, and so she inherited some several thousands of dollars. I think between Mabel and Emma, 2/3 of the estate went to them. The last third of the estate was divided between Margaret Land and Charles, and there was this property in Tarpon Springs that Margaret inherited, and then Charles, who had $300,000. I don't understand why Joseph would have given Charles anything. This was before Charles donated his entire estate, all his assets and monies, everything, to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. We'll kind of get into that a little bit, but this occurred. This was something that Joseph did. 160 acres in Polk County. Now that's near where Disneyland is, or Disney World is today, near Kissimmee. It's in Polk County. I guess Lakeland is the biggest city in Polk. It's in central Florida. It's not far. It's a little west of Orlando, west and south of Orlando. And the total value of that land, it looks like he estimates at $800, which doesn't seem like a whole lot to me. I don't know if it was really that small of a bequeath, but there was something else here. Now, Joseph listed right here all of his assets: $5,800, $2,500 mortgage, $5,000 for this house, $3,000 for the property in Tarpon Springs, and so on. And there's nothing mentioned. There's 180 shares in the Kaolin Company. And what he gave to Charles was 160 acres of land in Polk County, Florida. Also, it looks to me, it's hard for me to read, it's either 30 or 50. I think it's 30 shares of stock. Now, he had divided up the stock between the women. Mabel got 40, Margaret got 40, and Emma got 100 shares of the Kaolin Company. There is something here he did not list in his assets that he had given to Charles. And it's 30 shares of stock in the Railway and Dock Construction Company of New York City. And it's a little hard for me to read all this. It's not clear. All in his name and right. What is this? I tried to look it up. I couldn't find anything really about this Railway and Dock Construction Company in New York. But there's some value there, and he didn't list what that value was. So why is Charles getting anything? Why is he getting 160 acres of land, which today is probably worth quite a bit of money? 160 acres is quite a piece of land. It's not small. You can do quite a bit of developing on a piece of property of that size. At the time, it was the middle of nowhere. In the late 1890s, Central Florida was very remote. The only way you could get to a city like Orlando was going up the St. Johns River on a steamer, disembarking, and then catching some kind of a carriage or some service that would take you into Orlando. Orlando was a very remote area back in around the turn of the 20th century. So I don't know how much it was. It was more than $800, and You would think that having a wife, when he married her, she was 26 years old. She needed a means. She was going to outlive him by quite some time. She had a teenager, 16 years old at the time he died. You would think that he would give Emma everything he could in order to be able to support herself for the rest of her life, at least to the best of his ability. But instead, he gives this man who has $300,000 more money, and you wonder why, if they were in business together, there was this much disparity between their fortunes. Why did Russell have $300,000 and his father a whole factor of 10 less in all? So it just raises questions. It raises ethical questions about Russell and what he was about. You would think that this was something that he would reject, that he would do all he could. I mean, Margaret at the time was married. She was being supported, Margaret Land, and she wasn't really in need of this property in Florida. And you would think that pretty much everything should go to Emma, but Charles did not care for Emma at all. And in fact, when things got rough between he and Maria, Charles wrote threatening letters to her family, saying that if they take her in, if she leaves him and they take her in, he threatened them with some kind of action. I can't remember exactly what it was. We'll have to read it when we get to it. But it was these were threats that were made by Russell to her family to not take her in because he was her husband, and he was going to punish her. There was something I had read, and it came from a site where most of the information that I came across was found on the same website. It's hard to corroborate everything, but this particular site suggested that Russell had, and there is actually a newspaper article that supports this, that Russell had publicly announced to the Bible students and their associates that Maria was mentally unstable. He planned to have her evaluated at it. He wanted to institutionalize her. A husband could do that back in those days. They had total control over their wives. We don't have equity today, but boy, if you had a tough time with your husband in the 1890s, they could do just about anything they wanted to do to you in those days. And he was threatening to institutionalize her. He had indicated to the brethren in some kind of a meeting he had with them, secret from her, a private meeting he held without her knowledge, Mariah's knowledge, indicating that she was mentally unstable. And she left really for her own safety. She left and went to her brother's home in Chicago for refuge. And her brother was a lawyer, and she could get some counsel from him about how to proceed with this dangerous man, this charlatan. But we'll get to that in a little bit. I think this segment is going to be a little longer because of the supporting materials I have here. So we'll just drop this, and we'll take a look at some other interesting aspects of this man's character, and I think that's important because these were things that most people just were not privy to. I'm sorry about that. This is okay. Here we go. I should have just gone to a tab. Now, you can search on Google for archived newspapers, and there was a newspaper being circulated in Brooklyn. It was published in Brooklyn, called the Brooklyn Eagle, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, as you can see there. And there are quite a number of articles about Russell that are insightful about his character. It gives you a different perspective. Things that he said that indicate what the man was like, and I think this is. There was the divorce trial. The story goes, now again, I haven't been able to fully confirm this information, but when things went bad between them, Russell made it very difficult for Mariah, and it got to the point where he wouldn't even speak to her, and they were living under the same roof. He wouldn't speak to her. When he needed to communicate with her, he'd write a note, and in certain cases, he would give individuals like Rose Ball the note to carry to Mariah, or verbally give a message to Ball to pass on to Mariah, and these were messages, personal matters between Mariah and Charles. That Rose had no business at all having any involvement in, but nonetheless, Russell was compelled to get her involved, and really it was for the purpose of humiliating Mariah, because Mariah had been influenced by women's rights and that whole movement, the suffragette movement, in the late 19th century. Again, women were very, they didn't have very many rights, and a pet actually had a better treatment than than a wife. Now, of course, many of the marriages back then were successful, happy, loving marriages, probably about the same as today. About 25% of marriages, 50% end up in divorce, and about 25% of those that remain married are considered happy marriages. So it is. A happy marriage is in the minority, but nonetheless there are some, and no doubt there were back in his day. Things probably weren't too different, but people tended to remain married and stay in an unhappy situation. Divorce wasn't very common in those days. But women certainly didn't have any rights. They were very poorly treated. They could be very poorly treated, and the husband had much more legal right than the wife, unfortunately. So when things got so bad for Mariah, she left, and she went to live with her sister, despite her sister having received a threatening letter from Russell not to accept her into her home. And it was her home. It was a home that she had legally inherited from her husband, Joseph. And so she had every right to harbor Mariah under her roof if she wanted to. Russell had no say in that. He had a lot of gall to indicate that to suggest a threat. I'm looking right here at my battery, and I've let it go. So we'll just go in and plug it in before it dies on me. I'm sorry about this. So let's get there before it darkens up on me. Okay, I made it. Okay, so let's take a look at this article, which gives us some indication of what kind of a person we're dealing with Charles Russell. This is attorney coming here. Now, there was, what I wanted to give in backdrop was Maria left and went to live with her sister in 1897. The end of 1897, around November, she went to live with Emma. Joseph died a month later, and so it was just Emma and Mariah living in Emma's house. And there was a home on that was at 80 Cedar Street, and at 79 Cedar Street there was a vacant home that was apparently owned by Charles. Now, she's still married. Mariah is still married to Charles. So she technically had rights to this home. She wasn't an interloper or a squatter that just wandered into somebody's home. She had certain rights, being the wife of the owner of the home, Charles Russell. And so she set up there. He made no provision for her support when she left. And he basically had made circumstances so intolerable for her. She wasn't well. She had a terrible disease called, let's see, let me find this. This is it. This is the infection she had. Erysipelas. It's a staph infection. Now, you got to remember, this is at a time before there were antibiotics. I don't even think they had sulfa drugs for infections in those days. You just had to be fortunate to live through it. And this is what it does to you. These are images of what this is. It's a skin infection. It makes you tremendously ill. You could die from it. It is a skin infection that spreads through the lymphatic system, streptococcal infection. And she had this, Mariah had this, and he treated her very poorly. She was in a sick room for about 5 weeks. Apparently, he threw her out of the room when she was sick with this. Apparently, she had this all over her body. It started on her face, and then it spread afterwards through her entire body. He didn't give her proper medical treatment. Russell was really big on quackery stuff. The Watchtower is known for crank cures, topical creams that cure cancer, and other medical, it just basic like snake oil stuff. And Russell was really big on that. He also was into phrenology. He sized people up by their head shapes. So if you had a bump or an oddly shaped head, that he would judge a person by the shape of their head using phrenology, and he believed that he was a superior intellect because of the shape of his head. And if you read the Laodicean Messenger book, there are segments in there that refer to phrenologist assessments of Charles Russell, and their glowing assessments about him. So she lived in this home without support from Charles, even though he had $300,000 at the time, maybe even more. He was living at the Bible house at the Watchtower, and she began to let out rooms in this home in order to make some income for herself. And she was making about $30 a month doing this, letting rooms. And then 3 years went by, and Russell, or 4 years went by, and Russell evicted her. Physically went up to the house and evicted her. Not legally. He didn't have a legal judgment on Mariah. He just went up there with a couple of thugs from the Watchtower. One of them was Bonnet, Jay Bonnet, and he figures big in Watchtower history. And there were several of them. They physically entered. Russell broke a window apparently and cut himself trying to climb into the home. Mariah wouldn't let them in, but they finally forcibly made their way in. She had called her lawyer, and he said, keep the door locked, don't let them in. But they broke their way in anyway, and they evicted her, threw her out on the street, and her subletters, those that were letting rooms from her. And they didn't give them their possessions. Some of them had trouble getting their possessions back. And they moved individuals into the house. Russell just confiscated the house and threw her out. So she had nowhere and no means, no roof to keep her warm and dry, and no means of supporting herself at all. So in 1903, she sued Charles Russell, and they had come to an interim agreement, sued Russell for divorce. And as an interim measure, there was an agreement. The court imposed a $40 a month alimony and a separation. They granted Mariah a separation and $40. They found cause. The judge found cause. Now, if they didn't find cause, she'd be forced to move back in to Charles, because, again, wives didn't have those kinds of rights. And she had no means of her own at that time. So she was granted this $40 a month alimony. And she then took him to court again in I think it was 1908, and for a final settlement of their separation. And it was a condition called a divorce from, a divorce from bed and board. And it wasn't a full divorce, but it was like a separation, a legal separation, a final legal separation. And she was seeking an increase in her, in the amount that she was getting, from $40 a month to $100 a month. Now, when you do the conversion of $40 a month, that's the equivalent in buying power today of about $1,200 a month, which is under $1,200 a month. That's what, $15,000 a year, something of that nature. That would be the equivalency. Let's say $16,000 a year. Try to live today on $16,000 or $17,000 a year. You just can't. Yes, it was a little different. It was a little cheaper in those days to live, but we're not talking about living extravagantly here. We're talking about hand-to-mouth existence, and so she wasn't really getting anything. And Russell wasn't inclined to pay this alimony. And so here's the Brooklyn Eagle. You can find this wonderful website where all of the articles about Charles Taze Russell that were published by the Brooklyn Eagle are found on this one website in these clippings. And so I found this very interesting reading, and I just want to read several of these in order to give you kind of an idea of who the man was. Now, again, the Eagle, the Brooklyn Eagle, they didn't favor Russell very much. They didn't like him as a person. The editorial committee or editor in charge of the Eagle certainly didn't care for Russell and considered the group a cult, and at whatever opportunity he could, he would publish articles that were not favorable towards Russell. And Russell was very much inclined not to accept criticism. He did not like criticism, and he would sue individuals over libel for criticizing him. And when you looked at this stuff, what they were criticizing him for, it would have been better if he had just not done anything. But one of the suits was a libel suit against the Brooklyn Eagle for $100,000. That was a lot of money in those days, and so we'll kind of touch on that as we go through these articles. But this one I found interesting because it had to deal with Russell's divorce, and there's some quotes here from Russell himself. And this was probably sometime around 1909. I don't have an exact date on this article, but these are news clippings from 1909 to 1916 when he passed on. And that's the time when the Watchtower moved to Brooklyn. And it gives a little insight in here to this guy. I will leave either tonight. Now, this is Mariah's lawyer. He was a congressman, a U.S. congressman, and an attorney who took up her cause. She had no money, and he felt sympathetic towards her, and so he worked on her behalf, this Stephen G. Porter. And so he was her counsel, and this is he that is being quoted. I will leave either tonight or tomorrow for Brooklyn to secure the attachment of Pastor Russell's property, said attorney Stephen Porter this morning. Mr. Russell must pay the alimony awarded his wife or take the consequences. Judge McFarland has ruled that Russell must pay up, and we're going to see that he does. So he was a deadbeat husband. He wasn't. He was so sour towards his wife that he refused to pay her alimony. And at the time she secured her divorce 2 years ago, Mrs. Russell, Pastor Russell's wife, was allowed alimony of $40 a month. Okay, so the divorce was 1908, so this must be about 1910, this article. And the first award was $40 a month, which came out of the Watchtower. They paid this $40 a month for several years until the case was brought up again in 1908. Russell has removed to Brooklyn and has taken all his assets with him. Judge McFarland, in his opinion, says that Russell's answer to his wife's petition is at least in bad taste, after the court had previously noted in the hearing of to fix alimony. The sale of the Pittsburgh property by the sheriff on a trifling judgment against Russell is referred to show that it was disposed of in fraud of his wife's rights. Now, this is something that you can look up into, which is very interesting. There was a sham sheriff sale that condemned Russell's properties. I believe all of the Watchtower assets and other properties that Russell had went to a sheriff sale because this sheriff apparently was one of the Bible students. He was a cohort of Russell, and Russell was delinquent on some kind of an obligation or payment, which then put the properties into the hands of the sheriff. And the sheriff then opened up sale of these properties, and the Watchtower bought the properties for something like $1. And this is the way that Russell disposed of the property in some kind of a scheme to avoid Mariah getting any control over his properties, but by having it condemned and then resold to the Watchtower. And that's what's being referred to here. And so this is the kind of person we're dealing with here. This is that wonderful man that I heard about all my life, the Laodicean messenger. And after reviewing the case, the court stated that no question of contempt or punishment is involved. Let's see, and after reviewing the case, it's really difficult to read. The court stated that no question of contempt of punishment of contempt or punishment is involved, and that the consideration of the court is in the enforcement of the decree. Okay, so they're not finding Russell in contempt, at least at this point, or to punish him, but to give her what she's owed, and was given right to by the court. Reference is made to the transfer of all of Russell's property to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. That's this sheriff's sale. And the agreement of that society to pay Mrs. Russell $40 a month. Judge McFarland declared that to refuse an attachment would allow any respondent to place his property in the hands of a friend and then defy the court's power. And the judge was fully aware of this scheme that Russell had collaborated with this sheriff, a friend of his. And this is just dirty business. I mean, even if it was legal, and Russell couldn't, at the time be brought before a court for this, it's just dirty business. And he knew it. He knew what he was doing. When Pastor Russell was interviewed at the House of Bethel at 124 Columbia Heights this afternoon in reference to the above dispatch, he had the following to say. Now, this is a quote. This is what Russell said. "The attorneys for my wife are bluffing. They cannot levy on any property here in this state," because they had moved from Pennsylvania to New York, in part to avoid his wife getting any of his property. The ruling was made for Pennsylvania, and now they're in New York, and he's saying she can't touch any of his property because they're in a new state. So there were two reasons for Russell moving to New York. One, because it was a center of everything. It was the gateway for the U.S. to the world. It was the U.S. financial center. And Russell believed that he could avoid any further problems with his wife and the divorce that he was undergoing with her. And he says, nor can they levy on any property of mine anywhere, for I have no property. All that I had I transferred more than 5 years ago to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. If the attorneys can find any property in my name anywhere, they are welcome to it. All of this talk about coming here is bluster. This is the man that was so holy. All of this talk about coming here is bluster. My wife has been making as much trouble for me as she can during the past 11 and a half years since she is separated from me. Her purpose is to worry me or my friends until the latter come forward and declare they will settle and thereby stop the annoyance. If I were to die tomorrow, I think my former wife would soon follow me, for she could not live unless she had me to nag. What kind of a statement is that? This is supposedly a man of God. This is a man that is supposed to be so loving and so and so spiritual, and he's defaming her. This is slander against her name, against her character, and he's talking. He preached. What a hypocrite! He taught that no man should slander anybody, that no man, that you should turn the other cheek, as the master taught. When you're taken to a court of law and they're asked for your coat, give them your shirt too, and turn the other cheek. This is the man, and he's calling his wife a nag in a public paper. But I harbor no resentment against her. He just called her a nag. He said that she couldn't live unless she was there to disturb his peace. But I have no resentment. Well, that's bull. That is an outright lie. He just caught himself. For 15 years, she made the noblest of wives. But about a dozen years ago, she became imbued with women's rights ideas, and they ruined all the poetry of our married life. What kind of a married life was this? When you read his obituary, you realize that they entered into a celibate marriage. Now, I knew of Bible students that entered into celibate marriages because they used Russell as a model. I knew of one young man whose father was very prominent in the Watchtower and in the Bible students when they separated from Watchtower. And he got married to a young Bible student gal, and she refused to marry him unless it was agreed upon celibate marriage. And after a few years, this poor fella had an affair, an extramarital affair, and through guilt and shame and his conscience, he admitted to the affair, and it ruined him. Through the rumor mill, he became the scandal of the year for Bible students at that time, and it just ruined his reputation. He couldn't be an elder. He couldn't. He just ruined any prospect he had among the Bible students, and it's because of this sick man here, Charles Russell, and his warped sense of what's right, and he's calling this marriage a poetry of our married life. What a hypocrite, and what an awful person. When I read this stuff, I started really getting sick. I didn't like him. But I got a much better idea of this man when I read about how he treated his wife. You know, when you enter into a marriage relationship, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you should at least respect your partner and do your best, whether it is to work on your marriage and stay together, or to say we're better off alone. But to treat another person in this way is just cruelty, and it's unright. It's not right at all. He is not a moral person, this man. He really sickened me. And I thought Rutherford was a bad guy. Russell was no better. He just was much more subtle about it. Rutherford didn't try to hide his infidelity and bad treatment of his son and his wife, but you kind of expect it from a guy like Rutherford. Russell, who was set up as a model of morality, was anything but, and you can read into his character by these statements. And he says, I have been paying, or rather, the society has been paying her $40 a month regularly. But she was not satisfied with this and recently obtained an order of the court raising it to $100. Okay, so $100 a month at that time would be about $3,000 a month today. That is not an inordinate amount of money. Okay, they didn't have to face the taxes that we do today, and the cost of putting a roof over your head is much greater today than it was back then. But try living on $30,000 a year, and you're in the poverty level. We're talking poverty, and Russell's claims that this is inordinate. This is an unthinkable amount. How dare she think about asking for $100 a month? And he says, I haven't the money to pay this, and the society is in no way liable, except that he had 100% say, and only say, in what the society spent on. And we'll see that in a little bit in another article where Van Amberg, from his own mouth, testifies in a court trial. He says, this lady is in comfortable circumstances. This lady is in comfortable circumstances, and I should not want her. I should not want her to want for anything. She has all she needs now, but her lawyers haven't. I have no fear at this announcement that Attorney Stephen G. Porter is coming here to levy on me. Just then, the telephone bell rang, and after an extended conversation over the wire with the manager of a printing establishment, Pastor Russell nonchalantly ordered 1 million copies of a tract struck off a press as quickly as possible. They added that little blurb to show the hypocrisy. And even to these worldly people, this man of God who was the last word on morality, what kind of a person he really was. And I'm glad that they published these articles, because if this wasn't the truth, if this didn't really happen, they'd be sued for slander, they'd be sued for libel. And he didn't sue them for this. And he sued for something even less scandalous, or let's say less strong, in terms of deriding him with a cartoon. He sued for $100,000. We'll take a look at this cartoon in a minute about miracle wheat. But yeah, this is what we have here. And $100 a month was not living in the lap of luxury for that, even at that time. So, $100 a month, 10 months. What is that? 10,000. Let's see. $100 a month is $1,000 a year. Okay, $1,000 a year. Let's see. It's $1,200 a year. 30. So that's about equivalent to $36,000 a year today in 2021 money. Try to live on that. You can't rent a place for that amount of money and have enough left over for food and clothing. So this guy really didn't. He harbored a lot of resentment towards her and her suffragette ways, women's rights. How dare her? This article here, he became, he's a rock star and he's got stalkers. The story about her is that he allegedly, this Sophie person, met her on a ship coming back from Europe, from England, and she started stalking him, and they eventually had her evaluated for mental illness and for insanity, and she wouldn't leave him alone. Who knows? Maybe they had some kind of a tete-a-tete on the ship ride, and who knows? But anyway, I'm not going to talk about that much. This one isn't interesting. This was related to the miracle wheat. Skeptical Uncle Sam seeks to know more about miracle wheat. Now, the miracle wheat story is a pretty well-known thing, and it was a scheme where Russell claims that he was innocently offering what he really believed to be a special kind of wheat that yielded so much more in terms of, had so much more yield, and he called this stuff miracle wheat, and they were advertising it in the Watchtower magazine, and he was selling it at an inordinate price of about $60 a bushel, when wheat, normal wheat, I don't know anything about agriculture, so I don't know what normal wheat is, but what was being sold for agricultural purposes at the time was being sold for quite a bit less. So $60 a bushel was considered to be an outrageous price to pay. And they were selling this wheat out of the Brooklyn Tabernacle in Brooklyn, and it caught quite a bit of attention, and it even got government. It caught the government's interest, and it turns out the government put this miracle wheat under a series of scientific tests. They evaluated it, and apparently it had lower yield than the wheat grain that was being sold typically on the market for agricultural purposes. So the miracle wheat was miraculously less yielding than what you could expect. And here is the interesting article. Unfortunately, some of this can't be read very well, but this is the best we can do. Pastor Russell sues the Brooklyn Eagle for $100,000. Now, back then, $100,000 was a lot of money. A lot of money. That is roughly the equivalent of about $3 million. Let's take a look at this. Let's see. Let's see. What is 100? Let's see. $1 in 1910 worth in 2021. So it's a factor converted is about $29. About $29. $1 then would have the same buying power as $29 today, rounded up to 30, and so that's about $3 million today. That's not a small lawsuit, especially for a cartoon, because this is what Russell was suing over. The Brooklyn Eagle published this this little cartoon. This is the Union Bank, and they called it the Onion Bank because of they say the stench of skullduggery. I guess there were scandals associated with the Union Bank in terms of false loans and investments and such. But they bring this Union Bank. They call it the Onion Bank because of the malodorous stench that came from it, and it's yelling to a fellow that looks like Pastor Russell, dressed like Pastor Russell, with a little bag of wheat that's spilling out onto the ground. And the individual out there is yelling, "You're wasting your time." And it says, "If Pastor Russell can get $1," is the caption. I don't think you can read it. But anyway, this was the cartoon that the Brooklyn Eagle was being sued over by Pastor Russell for $100,000. Now, this is the man who turned the other cheek. Girl kissed Pastor. This is that one that came across. Let's see. Oh, this is talking about Rose Ball. I don't want to get there. This is courtroom testimony, question and answers from one of the legal trials. Rose apparently was not available to speak, to testify at court because she was sent to Australia with a new husband, Ernest Hennings, who had been then disfellowshipped by Russell for not coming around on his major change in doctrine on the covenants. I think that doctrinal change was around 1907. So it's convenient that they were in Australia and disfellowshipped at the same time. So Rose couldn't testify. But a lot of these articles dealt with the divorce. Reasons why Pastor Russell's wife left him. This is definitely worth looking at. Again, this gives you some insight into Russell. It said Mrs. Russell lived in very desolate surroundings. The conditions of utter dissolution with respect to her, what must have been the feelings of this woman after 2 years of indignities doubt was crushed, humiliated, and brokenhearted, and would naturally have apprehensions of the absence of her husband to take some sort of proceedings founded upon his alleged pretense of her mental unsoundness. Again, I had mentioned that he had alleged her mental instability and that he was going to have her tested for mental condition. It refers to that in this article. It says, and there is no doubt that her husband at this time was seriously considering the advisability of inquiring into his wife's mental condition by an expert examination, and notwithstanding the fact that when asked the question on the witness stand, he denied his letter to Judge Breeden contains this statement. Indeed, had it not been for my dislike of publicity on this lady's account, as well as on my own, I would have felt it only a reasonable duty to have the court appoint a competent expert examination respecting this lady's mental condition. This is how he refers to his wife. While living alone with his wife in this large building, he prepared a cunningly worded letter to cite that they had reconciled their differences, and then on Friday evening of the week, he presents it to his wife for her to sign, for her signature, and all night long he follows her about from room to room, urging, coaxing, pleading, and threatening until her head is in a whirl of doubts and fear, and all of the next day he keeps it up and thus forces her to sign a letter, coercion. That sounds like coercion. You can't sign a contract when you're coerced to sign it. It's not legal. There are laws against that. To sign the letter and under protest. This is undenied by the respondent. So Russell didn't deny that he had done this. And although the defense was based on the fact that a reconciliation had occurred between the libellant and respondent, the remarkable fact exists that this letter, which was in the possession of the respondent, was never even offered in evidence. So this is an article about their divorce, and this is something that I found interesting. It says, insulting letters sent to wives, relatives, and friends. The insulting letters to her relatives and friends, warning them not to harbor the libellant or communicate with her, were repeated on November 8, 1897, and a copy given to the libellant, exhibit number 11. A few days after this, the respondent telephoned a message to his wife that he was going out of the city, and for what he did not say where or what for. His wife drew her own conclusions about his intentions, and he then, wittingly circulated false reports about her mental derangement, and this is what I was talking about with regard to telling the Bethelites that she was mentally unsound, and all this maneuvering to completely isolate her from the society, all society, even that of her own family. The withdrawal at night, because this letter was sent to her sister Emma, to his father Joseph, to her brother in Chicago, and I think there was another family member threatening her that they should not harbor her. The withdrawal at night of all employees of the Watchtower from the building in which he lived, and the utter desolation of her home, and the withdrawal of all support to her mind, pointed to one conclusion conclusion, namely, that he proposed to deal with her upon the pretext of insanity, and that his unrevealed errand that night might be for such a purpose. The libellant left the building and took a train to Chicago to seek protection and counsel of her brother, who is a member of the bar in that city. You can't blame her. Who would blame her? There is not one syllable in the testimony to justify his repeated aspersion of her character and her mental condition, Judge Orlady says in his opinion. And this is the judge's statement. Nor does he intimate in any way that there was any difference between them other than she did not agree with him in his views of life and methods of conducting their business. He says himself that she is a woman of high intellectual qualities and of perfect moral character, while he denied in a general way that he attempted to belittle his wife, as she claimed. The general effect of his own testimony is a strong confirmation of her allegations. This was the judge's opinion during the divorce proceedings. He sympathized with her. And this was at a time when men sided with men. Men didn't side with women. The judge was more inclined to side with the man at that era, in that era. And so he did not get a very good opinion whatsoever of Charles Taze Russell. And it's interesting because these are things that I never heard about or seen. Giving up their homes and following Russellism. This one blew my mind for a couple of reasons. This is about a young girl, 17 years old, who's being harbored at the Bethel, and they're seeking. Her mother is seeking her, wants her back home, I believe. I believe that's the article. Let's see. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about this one. Oh boy, that scared me. That's acorn. It's acorn season. Okay. Well, this is talking about people giving up their properties. There is something that's very interesting about this Charles Taze Russell. This one was interesting. When he went overseas. Whoops, I'm sorry. I have to reload it. Darn it. I wasn't careful. I apologize for this, everybody. It might take a minute for it to download. But the article indicated that many of the alleged talks that he had given, he had gone on these worldwide tours, sailing around the world, giving lectures. And what they had found out was that he would disembark. They had an exploratory committee, see what they could do about arranging for him to give a lecture, and apparently making a decision that no lecture was feasible, so Russell would not give a talk, but he had claimed that he had stopped and given a talk in all these places in Japan and Hong Kong and Hawaii, and they found out that these alleged discourses that he had claimed to have given they were Harvey the Rabbit. They were did have an entourage that traveled around the world with him of some of the more elite Bible students. General Preble Hall was one, and they had professors and that. I showed a photograph of the travel committee in 1910, and that was another one, investment in dummies. There's so many of these articles here that give a whole different side to Russell than let's see, the lawsuit about the miracle weed. Let's see. I wanted to get the one we were talking about. Watchtower gets estate of pastor. Oh, this is after he died. Watchtower to elect a new head. Russell dies. Let's get back to that. Hawaiian. You saw the eagle victory. Truth not produced it. This is okay. Who pays the bills? That one I want to read. Pastor Russell must pay taxes. I wish that were true today for all religion. Where's that? Mystery call pastor's wife in Russell trial. Russell's finances barred or bared by follower. Russell loses life. Is this it? Yes. We're here now. Okay. You can see how many articles there are. I spent an afternoon yesterday reading them. Okay. So Russell took off for a world tour, and this article talks about how it did not deliver a address in Hawaii at all. It has long been known that the Pastor Russell has a strong imagination, but it now appears that he is even capable of delivering imaginary sermons. Pastor Russell never spoke in Honolulu during the few hours that his ship stopped there to take on coal. In the hope of securing an accurate report of his sermon, the Eagle wrote to the editor of the Hawaiian Star, which is published at Honolulu. His reply reads as follows. In answer to your inquiry of the December 10 concerning Pastor Russell, I would say that he was here for a few hours with the Bible Students Committee of Foreign Missions Investigation. That's General Preble Hall and a number of others, 4 or 5 others that made this committee, this entourage, that doctor this and professor that, and who knows. Preble was actually he was the adjutant general of the United States Army at the time. At this time, active. He didn't retire until 1912. He answered only to General Blackjack Pershing. So that's how high this guy was, and he was subordinate to Russell from this religious point of view. But did not make public address as was anticipated. So he didn't, even though he claimed that he had made a sermon there, he did not. And apparently this was common, that they were stopping at all these places claiming that he was doing this missionary work, but he wasn't actually doing anything. Pastor Russell loses libel suit, and when you read this, the Eagle, all their court fees, I think it was $1,500 in court fees had to be paid for by the Watchtower for this libel suit. The Watchtower also sued a Baptist minister, J.J. Ross for preparing a pamphlet and circulating a pamphlet that they claimed was libel or slander against Russell's character. And so the Watchtower filed a libel suit against Ross, and the courts turned it down. He had no money. What were they trying to do to this poor guy? Now, this is interesting. Please listen to this one. I know this has been a terribly long video, but this is interesting stuff. The teachings of the pastor to the beginning of the millennium age next year, 1914 is, Russell predicted 1914 was going to be the end of this world, Armageddon was going to come, and the kingdom would come, the church would be called in a rapture to heaven, and the 144,000 would be complete. And so in the trial on the $100,000 libel suit, this is an article about that, and Russell has given testimony, and so did Menta Sturgeon, who was a close associate or secretary of Russell. I'm starting to lose my voice a little, I'm sorry. Let me take a sip of this and see if that helps. The teachings of the pastor relating to the beginning of the next millennium next year were fully expounded before the jury. And so were the beliefs of his followers concerning the incarnation of the fallen angels. On the subject of the fallen angels, and you know, the Jehovah's Witnesses have a long-standing history in fantasy of demons and their ability to operate on somebody's mind. And it goes all the way back to the Bible students, to Russell. I was taught the same stuff as what we're reading here when I was a kid. And this is where it all comes from Russell. And on the subject of fallen angels, who Pastor Russell, in a paragraph read in court, has stated would occasionally assume human shape. The witness, Sturgeon said, they spelled his name wrong, his name was Menta Sturgeon, said he believed, and he was the one that accompanied Russell on his last trip to California, made his toga for him out of bed sheets on the train. So anyway, this is wild stuff. Has stated would occasionally assume human shape, so he believed they could take human shape. The witness, Sturgeon said, he believed that they had been condemned according to the Bible, not to Hades or Gehenna, but simply to a place meaning surrounding air or darkness. That is why they're able to appear at so-called seances, explained the witness. They operate in the dark. And this is why he took the vow so seriously and staying away from the occult, because he had this belief in fallen angels. He also had the same idea about guardian angels. And I learned a story when I was a kid in Sunday school about Pastor Russell walking alone late at night in a bad area of New York City, and there was a mugger there, and apparently he got arrested, and Russell went to visit him. This is just the upshot of the story. Went to visit this mugger, this alleged mugger, and asked him why didn't he mug him? He was alone. And he said, the reason I didn't mug you is because you had two large men walking on either side of you. And so these were Russell's guardian angels. They believed in this stuff. In the passage from the Watchtower that the lawyer read, the editor, who is Pastor Russell, told of a letter he had received from a Mr. Nicholson. Nicholson was from the branch in Australia, the Watchtower branch in Australia. Eventually, Nicholson was cast out of the Watchtower Society, I believe by Rutherford, when he didn't accept Rutherford's presidency. And he actually, a lot of the Watchtower properties in Australia were in Nicholson's name, and he took their assets because they had been put in his name. So Watchtower lost a lot of Australian assets. A Mr. Nicholson in Australia, in which it was related that this is bizarre. Pastor Russell told of a letter he had received from a Mr. Nicholson in Australia, in which it was related that Mrs. Nicholson had received a visit from a fallen angel that assumed the shape of Pastor Russell, and that she had fallen victim to the improper advances. Now, this is absolutely bizarre. I don't know what you can make about that, but this is bizarre. But here we start getting into some of the financial aspects of the Watchtower. And I think that this is important. Russell's finances bared by follower. Now, like I said, William Van Amberg was the Watchtower's financial treasurer, and he was the only one that knew the actual finances of the society, their expenditures, how much they got. And you got to remember, this is around 1910, 1911, and the value of money at that time, it's worth about 30 times what we see here in the amounts that they pronounce. And so here we get some rare insight into the society's finances. And donators. Now, Bible students were donating to the Watchtower Society, voluntary donations. And if you donated $10, you could get 1 share of voting stock if you request it. If you didn't request it, you didn't get the share. But if you donated $10, you had the right to a voting share in the society. And Van Amberg indicated here that Russell had 47,000 shares out of 50,000 shares that were issued. But that altogether, if all of the donations over the last 2 or 3 years were translated into shares, the donations would result into about 400 to 500,000 shares. Remember, each share was worth $10, so this indicates that between 400 and 500,000 shares worth were donated, which means between $4 and $5 million were donated to the society in the previous year to 2 years. And that $5 million translates to $143 million today. That's a lot of money. And this is a fledgling organization. We're not talking about 8.5 million Jehovah's Witnesses here. We're talking about, at that time, remember my memorial chart, of about 8,000 or 9,000 individuals that made up the Watchtower Society and its followers. So the society had a lot of money, And you could see how Russell could potentially understand or envision the potential this society had as a money-making operation going out, not wanting to see it end. This is his legacy. And he had absolute control of the money. Of the 50,000 shares, Russell had 47,000 shares. Now, he, as president of the company, of the corporation, held the majority of the stock, the 90 some percent of the stock, and had absolute say over the expenditures, what they spent and what they didn't spend on. And he was the one that had control of the money, and he's telling the court, what is it, during his trial over the divorce proceedings, the lawsuit his wife brought against him, that he didn't have the authority or the money to pay her $100 a month, which translates to about $36,000 a year in today's money. He held this 47,000 shares. Remember, $10 a share, that's $470,000 right there that he had at that time, that he held. And these are controlling shares of the Watchtower's stock that they had issued, voting. So he had absolute control over the society and over what would be today the equivalent of $143 million. Now, they do talk about how their expenses, how much they spent, and that the expenditures pretty much wipe out any of the money that they get. But, who knows? He says nobody audits them. And what is interesting is that in the trial, one of the jurors, it said juror number 5, asked the witness questions. I wish I could find that. Juror number 5 questions witness about election. Okay, so the juror was interested in the finances. Juror number 5 then took the witness who was Van Amberg, and asked further particulars about the election. And finally, Mr. Van Amberg referred to his books, which he had brought for the afternoon session. He said that the exact number of shares held by Pastor Russell was 44,000. So it wasn't 47. It was he clarified that it was 44,000, and that he himself was owner of 124 shares. So Van Amberg had 124 shares. Ritchie, who was a director, held 410 shares. There were about 60 individuals, he said, altogether, between 50 and 60 individuals that held voting shares. But the vast majority of the 50,000 shares that were distributed and issued were held by Russell. And all of those shares ended up going to the Watchtower when Russell died. But what I find astounding is how the juror was, you watch a lot of TV and you see a lot of these court cases. How often do you see a witness, a juror, ask a witness questions? The questions are only allowed by the attorneys. I don't know if this is a change that has taken place since the early 20th century. But I just find it absolutely intriguing and fascinating that a juror could question Van Amberg directly about his testimony. And he goes on to talk about the proceeds and the monies that they got, and we're talking about astounding amounts of money for such a small operation as the Watchtower at that time. talking about a major corporate. We're not talking about Carnegie Steel. We're not talking about U.S. Steel or Harriman's Railroads or anything like that. These guys, the oil, Rockefeller's oil. Carnegie retired in 1914, I think, from Carnegie Steel for $1 million a month. I mean, that was an astounding, mind-boggling amount of money. But he gave all that money away. And Russell was kind of getting in on this bonanza. We're talking about a lot of money here for a tiny little society. We're not talking about something that employed 400,000 employees. I could go on with some of these, but here I just want to read this one thing where the juror had initiated some questioning. The Eagles lawyer, Oland, continued the questioning of Van Amberg and talking about the monies that they have. And he says, who directs the expenditure of this money? Asked ex-Judge Oland. That's how they refer to this lawyer. The officers of the society. That means Pastor Russell, yourself, and the Vice President, Mr. Ritchie, does it not? Yes, sir, we are the ones responsible. Do you ever have one to audit your accounts? Yes, we keep a strict account with ourselves. I mean, does anyone besides you three ever go through your books to check up on expenditures? No, sir. In a worldly sense, we are not responsible to anyone for our expenditures. We are responsible only to God. I just found that mind-boggling. So I have an entirely different opinion of Russell. I didn't have a good one beforehand. And I don't have a very good opinion of religion at all. But the society started out corrupt. Russell was an immoral, an indecent, narcissistic man who treated his wife with indignity and was dangerous. He was cruel to her and lied. When he had this corporation that had millions of dollars at their disposal, and Russell had almost exclusive rights to say how the money was spent, not to see that his wife could live a decent in a decent way, then gives real insight into who this person is. And the Watchtower has held to that tradition that nobody has insight into their finances. Even to this day, they will not reveal their finances. And I can imagine what they are, as big as they are today, with an 8.5 million person following. So, with that, I'm going to shut this portion down and conclude the series. Look, a historical perspective of the Watchtower. And when did Bible students become Jehovah's Witnesses? That was all corrupt right from the outset. And if Bible students held a different opinion of Russell, it was because they were bamboozled. That goes for my family, and that goes for anybody who looks up to this wonderful man, this Laodicean messenger, this man from God. This is, I don't think I could have a lower opinion of this individual than I do at this very time, after having been inspired to look a little bit deeper, just a little bit deeper, into who he was and what the society's history was. And I just scratched the surface. I'm sure I'm not a fabulous researcher. I think a professional could really find a whole lot more. I really wish I could get the whole transcript of the divorce proceedings in my hands to confirm some of the things that you see on the internet about this, about the trial, about this man, about what he said. Statements like 1,000 women would just wish that they could be in Maria's place. He said that to her, that 1,000 women would be glad to have the position that she had, being his wife. And this is a very warped individual. So anyway, I know this has been very long. I did break it up into 3 separate sections, this being the longest. I hope you guys do see some of this, because I hope maybe it inspires you to take a look into some of these things that you can find online yourself, and maybe you'll come up with something even better than some of the stuff that I did. I mean, but it really yields insight to what this Watchtower Bible and Tract Society was all about from the very start. So I wish you all the best, and so long, everyone.